I got my people so freed up. I see the people.
What up, Tupac academics?
Go.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, Cadillac pulled up on the side of us. I just stayed on the river looking at the Cadillac when it pulled up. At this particular time, black arm came out of the window and he had a gun in his head.
He just started letting off.
I see mothers in black crime, brothers in back down, rocking out, those that rocking our own ground. It's the end. It's like
so many times, everything started moving in slow
I asked
motion.
my homie on the block why he strapped, he laughed, pointed his pistol as the cop called, passed the blast, it's just another murder. Nobody mourns no more, my teardrops get count my blessings, classes in session. The worst question is the first question. Why do we work like slaves, sweating blades to an early grave? Never got paid, but still we slave in the non-trade. Answer that, then answer this too. Love's gonna get you, you know it's true. Life's a life's true. You better backtrack and try to act and live. Got to be rolling and positive. Share it with me. Black cotton.
The autopsy. Out of the 9,250 people who died in 1996 in Clark County, 5,528 were reported to the coroner's office, and 3,138 were accepted for investigation. Of those, 978 were autopsied, including Tupac's body. Coroner Ron Flood, at the time, had a staff of 17 investigators, including Dr. Ed Brown, who went to the hospital and confirmed Tupac's death, toe-tagged him, put him in a body bag, and arranged to have his body taken to the office for an autopsy. When Tupac arrived at University Medical Center's Trauma Center, immediately following the shooting, he was wheeled into the recovery area and was resuscitated according to advanced trauma life support protocol, the report said, and a full trauma activation was called. He was placed on life support machines. 2 liters of blood that had hemorrhaged into his chest cavity were removed. His pulse was very thready, and initially he had a minimal blood pressure, which rapidly declined. In a conversation with Ed Brown at the hospital following Tupac's death, the surgeon told Brown that Tupac's injuries included a gunshot wound to his right chest with a massive hemothorax, and a gunshot wound to the right thigh with a bullet palpable within the abdomen. Tupac also had a gunshot wound to a right finger with a fracture. The preoperative diagnosis was a gunshot wound to the chest and abdomen and post-operative bleeding. He was taken immediately to the operating room for operative intervention and further resuscitation. His right lung was removed. Tupac underwent 2 surgeries. The first began at 6:26 p.m. on September 8th and lasted an hour. The surgery consisted of exploratory procedures, the surgeon wrote. He also noted that it appeared Tupac had had some prior surgery for bullet wounds in his upper right chest area. The second operation at University Medical Center consisted of ligation of bleeding and removal of a bullet from his pelvic area. It was done at midnight on September 8th and completed at 2:35 a.m. on September 9th. The 1 bullet remaining in Tupac's chest was not removed during surgery, but during the autopsy, Coroner Ron Flood told me. It then became evidence, he said. Tupac was pronounced dead at 4:03 p.m. September 13th by Dr. James Lovett at University Medical Center. Clark County Coroner Investigator Ed Brown was called to the hospital at 4:15 p.m. Upon my arrival, I found no apparent life signs, and trauma was observed to the right hand, right hip, and right chest under the right arm, apparently caused from gunshots. The media never saw the body leave the hospital because we didn't want to turn that into some sort of circus. His body went out another exit from the hospital from the back. That was our decision based on respect for the patient and based on respect for the family and based on the large number of people outside the hospital. We were uncertain as to what might happen and felt that it would be better to take another approach, and we did. The mortuary van carrying Tupac Shakur's body drove from the hospital to the morgue. The driver maneuvered the 3 blocks without being noticed, or so he thought. But fans did eventually make it there and pounded on the back door. Because of that, Coroner Ron Flood decided not to wait and do the autopsy the next day, but to do it that afternoon. Flood was worried about fans breaking in to get a glimpse of Tupac's corpse. An autopsy. After Tupac's body was taken by a mortuary ambulance to the morgue, a decision was made by both Clark County Coroner Flood, along with a sergeant and 2 detectives from homicide, to go ahead with the autopsy that evening. It's not unusual for the process to move quickly in Las Vegas. Examiners often perform autopsies on victims the same day their bodies are brought in, especially in homicide cases. In this case, for security reasons, the coroner didn't want the body to stay in the morgue overnight. Too many people knew that the coroner's offices were around the corner from the hospital, where a 24-hour vigil had begun 6 days earlier, following the shooting. Hundreds of people had flocked to the hospital when they heard the news. It was too risky to keep the body until the next day. Homicides Sergeant Manning and Detectives Becker and Franks met the ambulance at the coroner's office. The investigators were in the coroner's examining room as medical examiners performed Tupac's post-mortem exam. The coroner finished with his examination, autopsy, and coroner's report and handed over Tupac's body to Davis Funeral Home across the street from the hospital at 2127 West Charleston Boulevard. No doubt, Afeni chose the mortuary because of its close proximity to both the hospital and coroner's office. Also, it wasn't far from the Golden Nugget downtown where she had been staying all week. The mortuary employees, in turn, cremated Tupac's body overnight at Tupac's mother's request. It's no small task making arrangements to move a body from one state to another. That had to have played a role in Mrs. Shakur's decision to have her son's remains cremated with his ashes scattered instead of burying his body. Following a brief memorial service in a Las Vegas funeral parlor with a few friends and family, Afeni Shakur boarded a plane and returned to her home in Stone Mountain, Georgia, near Atlanta. It was a little more than 24 hours after her only son and oldest child had been pronounced dead. The ashes of Tupac's body were later scattered over a grassy area in a park in Los Angeles, where Tupac had spent the last years of his life. A small group of family members and friends were invited to the private informal ceremony. There was no pomp and circumstance for the fallen rapper. The brief ceremony honoring him was conducted with quiet dignity.